the most dangerous sound in the universe. Log entry Galactic Diplomatic Transmission 7329 Epsilon Recorder Ambassador Krell of the Zentauri Collective Standard Galactic Date 2417.334. Humans are, without a doubt, the most perplexing species ever documented in the known universe. And I say this with the full confidence of someone who has spent exactly 17 solar cycles studying their inexplicable existence. When the first transmission arrived from Earth, our xenobiological research team expected nothing more than another primitive species report. Standard procedure. Classification. Categorization. Maybe a footnote in some dusty galactic archive. Instead, we got, well, chaos. Their initial communication was a live broadcast of something called a monster truck rally. I'm still not entirely sure what that means, but it involved massive wheeled vehicles destroying smaller vehicles while something called metal music blared in the background. Our linguistic analysts spent 3 weeks trying to determine if it was a declaration of war, a mating ritual, or some form of ritualistic psychological warfare. Turns out it was entertainment. The Zentauri Collective has existed for 27,000 years. We've catalogued over 3 million sentient species. We have diplomatic protocols for everything from silicon-based life forms to crystalline consciousness networks. We have translation matrices that can decode communication from beings that communicate through electromagnetic pulse and gravitational wave modulation. And yet, humans. Their first official diplomatic meeting involved a representative named Colonel Marcus Reese wearing what he called a Hawaiian shirt and consuming something called nachos while simultaneously explaining complex geopolitical negotiations. He punctuated every third sentence by making what he described as a totally awesome explosion sound and occasionally high-fiving his own translator. Our initial threat assessment was generous. We categorized humans as potentially mildly dangerous, somewhere between a moderately aggressive tree frog and a slightly irritated hedgehog. This was our first mistake. The Zentauri Collective prides itself on comprehensive xenological analysis. We have entire research divisions dedicated to understanding potential spacefaring civilizations. Our predictive models are so advanced that we can calculate the probability of a species achieving interstellar travel down to 6 decimal points. Except with humans, our models kept breaking. Every time we thought we understood them, they would do something so utterly incomprehensible that our entire analytical framework would collapse like a neutron star experiencing an existential crisis. Take their military technology, for instance. Most species develop weapons with clinical precision, efficiency, calculated destruction. Humans, they named their missile systems things like Hellfire and Widowmaker, and decorated their war machines with cartoon characters and aggressive linguistic declarations. Their tanks have nose art. Their fighter pilots have call signs like Maverick and Goose. Their submarines are named after sea creatures with an apparent preference for the most terrifying options available. Who names a weapon of mass destruction Seawolf and thinks that's a normal thing to do? Humans. That's who. But none of that prepared us for what was coming. None of our extensive research, none of our millennia of diplomatic experience could have predicted the true nature of human military capability. Because humans don't just fight wars. They get excited about fighting wars. And excitement, as we would soon learn, was the most dangerous weapon in the universe. The most dangerous sound in the universe. Log entry Galactic Diplomatic Transmission 7329 Epsilon Recorder Ambassador Krell of the Zentauri Collective Standard Galactic Date 2417.334. Humans are, without a doubt, the most perplexing species ever documented in the known universe. And I say this with the full confidence of someone who has spent exactly 17 solar cycles studying their inexplicable existence and still understanding approximately 0% of their bizarre behavioral patterns. Let me be clear, the Zentauri Collective has encountered civilizations that communicate through bioluminescent skin patterns. We've negotiated with gaseous entities that exist simultaneously in 17 dimensions. We once spent a diplomatic summit communicating with a species that primarily expressed complex mathematical theorems through intricate ear wiggle sequences. And yet, humans remain our greatest enigma. Their first transmission that truly caught our attention wasn't a scientific breakthrough. It wasn't a mathematical discovery. It was a YouTube video of something called Florida Man attempting to wrestle an alligator while wearing what appeared to be a banana-themed costume and singing what our linguistic algorithms identified as a surprisingly competent rendition of 1980s power ballads. Our initial xenopsychological report ran 17,000 pages and essentially boiled down to we have no earthly idea what just happened. The technological progression of human civilization defied every predictive model in our archives. Most species develop technology in carefully measured increments, logical progressions, systematic improvements. Humans. They innovate like they're playing some bizarre cosmic game of technological Russian roulette. Consider their internet a communication network they initially used for cat videos, argumentative political discussions, and something called memes which somehow transformed into the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering system in planetary history. They created a global information exchange where serious scientific discussions happen mere millimeters away from arguments about which fictional dragon would win in a fight. Their scientific community is equally bewildering. Imagine developing nuclear technology, then immediately wondering, what if we put this incredible energy source into a portable device that people can use to play video games and argue with strangers? Only humans would look at the pinnacle of theoretical physics and think, you know what this needs? A touchscreen and the ability to order pizza. Our military intelligence division spent decades trying to understand human warfare doctrine. Most species approach conflict with cold, calculated strategies. Humans approach conflict with what can only be described as weaponized enthusiasm. They don't just develop military technology. They celebrate military technology. Their weapon development meetings aren't sterile, clinical affairs. They're closer to rock concerts. Imagine a presentation about a new missile system where the lead engineer is wearing a t-shirt with an ironic slogan, drinking something called an energy drink, and punctuating technical specifications with dad jokes and movie quotes. One of our earliest intercepted military research videos featured a group of engineers playing AC/DC's Thunderstruck while testing a new electromagnetic pulse weapon, not as background music, as an integral part of the testing procedure. Their military patches alone were a psychological warfare technique. Most species use heraldic symbols or geometric patterns. Human military units have patches featuring everything from cartoon characters to deliberately inappropriate jokes, mythological creatures, and what appeared to be deliberate nonsensical imagery. The 101st Airborne Division, a military unit that specializes in aerial assault, used a patch featuring a screaming eagle wearing sunglasses and holding what appeared to be both a weapon and a musical instrument. When our analysts tried to decode its symbolic meaning, 3 of them required mandatory psychological recalibration. But here's the truly terrifying part beneath all this apparent chaos. There was a system, a method, a level of adaptive intelligence that made our most advanced predictive algorithms look like children's counting blocks. Humans didn't just adapt to challenges. They transformed challenges into opportunities for what they called epic stories. They didn't solve problems. They turned problem solving into a form of performance art. Our collective had spent millennia believing that successful civilizations were built on careful planning, measured responses, and logical progression. Humans were about to teach us how spectacularly wrong we were. And it would all start with a sound. A specific kind of excitement that would make even the most battle-hardened Zentauri warriors reconsider everything they thought they knew about warfare. The sound of humans getting excited. Major Elena Rodriguez had heard a lot of strange requests in her 15-year military career. But being asked to lead an interspecies tactical training unit for the Galactic Collaborative Defense Force was definitely a new peak of absurdity. The briefing room looked like a bad science fiction movie casting call. To her left, a Zentauri diplomatic team that looked like someone had crossbred a lobster with an octopus, and given it passive-aggressive bureaucratic training. To her right, representatives from 3 other alien species who seemed equally confused about why a human was even in the room. So Elena said, taking a swig from her thermos which contained what the Zentauri translator protocol identified as weaponized caffeine, who wants to talk about how we're going to prevent the upcoming conflict. Silence. More silence. Lieutenant Zarake of the Zentauri delegation cleared his 3-part throat. His communication tendrils were doing that nervous flutter thing that Elena had learned meant extreme diplomatic discomfort. Major Rodriguez, he began, his universal translator giving him a weirdly formal British accent. Our intelligence suggests that the Krax Imperium is preparing a significant border incursion. Traditional defensive strategies have proven ineffective. Elena raised an eyebrow. Ineffective how? They've destroyed 17 planetary defense grids, obliterated 3 collaborative fleet deployments. Our most advanced strategic algorithms predict a 94.3% probability of total systemic collapse within 6 standard galactic months. She took another drink of her coffee. Sounds like a Tuesday. The room went silent again. Apparently her joke did not translate well across species. Lieutenant Zara K's tendrils did another complicated dance that the translation matrix interpreted as somewhere between profound confusion and mild intestinal distress. You find potential galactic annihilation amusing? No, Elena responded, pulling up a holographic tactical display. I find potential galactic annihilation a problem to be solved. There's a difference. The hologram shifted, showing complex military deployment scenarios. Where the alien strategists saw lines and vectors, Elena saw opportunities, weaknesses, potential disruption points. The Zentauri had sophisticated technology, incredible computational power, diplomatic networks that spanned thousands of star systems. What they lacked was a fundamental understanding of adaptive, improvisational strategy. Humans, by contrast, invented entire military doctrines based on the principle of hold my beer and watch this. Your current defensive posture, Elena explained, manipulating the hologram with casual expertise, assumes the enemy will follow predictable engagement protocols. The Krax don't just not follow protocols. They probably don't even know what a protocol is. Senior analyst Krell, the same ambassador who had previously documented humanity's inexplicable existence, leaned forward. His translator rendered his complex body language as a mix of skepticism and reluctant curiosity. And your proposed alternative is? Elena grinned. And in that moment, every non-human in the room took an involuntary step backward. We're going to make them so uncomfortable they don't know whether to fight or run away. And we're going to do it with approximately 63% less equipment than any reasonable military strategist would consider possible. The training would be brutal. The preparation unconventional. And the Krax Imperium was about to learn a fundamental lesson about underestimating humanity. Somewhere in the room, a Zentauri communication device made a sound that their translation matrix identified as the alien equivalent of "oh dear." Major Elena Rodriguez was just getting started. Major Elena Rodriguez had heard a lot of strange requests in her 15-year military career. But being asked to lead an interspecies tactical training unit for the Galactic Collaborative Defense Force was definitely a new peak of absurdity. The briefing room looked like a bad science fiction movie casting call. Imagine the United Nations, but replace diplomats with beings that looked like they'd been designed by a committee of evolutionary biologists suffering from a collective fever dream. To her left, the Zentauri diplomatic team imagine a creature that was 1 part lobster, 1 part octopus, and 1 part mid-level government bureaucrat. To her right, representatives from 3 other alien species who seemed to be simultaneously terrified and confused about why a human was even in the room. So Elena said, taking a swig from her thermos, which contained what the Zentauri translator protocol delicately identified as weaponized caffeine, who wants to talk about how we're going to prevent the upcoming conflict. Silence. Silence. Or silence. Air. The kind of silence that makes crickets look like chatterboxes. Lieutenant Zara K of the Zentauri delegation cleared his 3-part throat. His communication tendrils were doing that nervous flutter thing that Elena had learned meant extreme diplomatic discomfort. Imagine an octopus trying to play jazz hands while simultaneously preparing a tax return. Major Rodriguez. He began, his universal translator giving him a weirdly formal British accent that suggested someone had programmed it using nothing but BBC documentaries and Jane Austen novels. Our intelligence suggests that the Krax Imperium is preparing a significant border incursion. Traditional defensive strategies have proven, how shall I put this, monumentally, catastrophically ineffective. Elena raised an eyebrow. Ineffective how? Zara K's tendrils did a complicated dance that the translation matrix struggled to interpret. Part mathematical equation, part interpretive dance, part existential crisis. They've destroyed 17 planetary defense grids, obliterated 3 collaborative fleet deployments, systematically dismantled our most advanced strategic networks. Our most sophisticated predictive algorithms predict a 94.3% probability of total systemic collapse within 6 standard galactic months. He paused, then added with what seemed like genuine bewilderment, and they did most of this using what appears to be recycled mining equipment and what our linguists believe is the alien equivalent of duct tape. Elena took another drink of her coffee. Sounds like a Tuesday. The room went silent again. Apparently her joke did not translate well across species, or possibly across any known form of sentient communication. Lieutenant Zara K's tendrils performed what the translation matrix interpreted as a complex emotional ballet somewhere between profound confusion, mild intestinal distress, and sudden onset of an existential crisis. You find potential galactic annihilation amusing? No, Elena responded, pulling up a holographic tactical display that looked like something between a 3D chessboard and a Jackson Pollock painting. I find potential galactic annihilation a problem to be solved. There's a difference. The hologram shifted, showing complex military deployment scenarios that to the alien strategists looked like random lines and vectors. But to Elena, it was a canvas of potential, weaknesses, disruption points, opportunities that nobody else could see. Senior analyst Krell, the same ambassador who had previously documented humanity's inexplicable existence, leaned forward. His body language suggested a mix of skepticism, reluctant curiosity, and the kind of existential dread one might feel watching a toddler play with a loaded weapon. "And your proposed alternative strategy is?" he asked, his translator rendering his complex body movements as something between a diplomatic query and a nervous breakdown. Elena grinned. And in that moment, every non-human in the room took an involuntary step backward. It was the kind of smile that suggested she knew exactly how to turn a potential galactic war into something resembling a very elaborate practical joke. "We're going to make the Krax so fundamentally uncomfortable that they won't know whether to fight, surrender, or seek immediate psychological counseling. And we're going to do it with approximately 63% less equipment than any reasonable military strategist would consider possible." She pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and something salvaged from a 1980s arcade game. "First things first. We're going to need some very specific equipment. And by specific, I mean absolutely nothing that makes sense according to any known military procurement protocol." The Zentauri communication devices started making sounds that their translation matrices were struggling to categorize. Part confusion, part terror, part what could only be described as a technological whimper. Major Elena Rodriguez was just getting started, and the Krax Imperium was about to learn a fundamental lesson about underestimating humanity. Somewhere in the room, a junior Zentauri diplomat was pretty sure he was developing what humans would call an ulcer. This was going to be interesting. The Krax border defense system was considered the most impenetrable network in the known galaxy. 17 layers of quantum encrypted force fields. Automated defense platforms that could calculate and neutralize incoming threats faster than most species could blink. Predictive algorithms so advanced they could supposedly anticipate an attack before the attacking force even conceived of the mission. They did not, however, have a protocol for what Major Elena Rodriguez was about to do. "Okay," Elena said into her communication unit. "Operational Phase 1 is officially classified under what the hell are we doing?" Lieutenant Zara K's translation matrix converted her words with a mixture of confusion and barely restrained panic. "Major, our tactical assessment suggests a 99.7% probability of mission failure." Elena checked her equipment. Standard issue military gear mixed with what looked suspiciously like components from a high-end gaming computer and something that might have been cobbled together from a radio repair shop. "Lieutenant," she responded, 99.7% probability of failure just means we've got a 0.3% chance of absolute madness. And in human military doctrine, that's what we call a good start." The mission target was Krax Outpost Sigma 9, a defensive installation so technologically advanced that it made most supercomputers look like abacuses. Traditional approaches, direct assault, strategic bombardment, infiltration had all failed spectacularly. Elena's approach? Absolutely none of the above. Her first move involved something the Zentauri tactical team initially thought was a joke. She uploaded what appeared to be a collection of early 21st century internet memes directly into the Krax communication networks. What possible strategic value could images of cats doing ridiculous things of Senior Analyst Krell demanded? Is tendrils doing that nervous mathematical dance that suggested profound existential confusion? Psychological warfare, my tentacled friend Elena muttered. The memes weren't just random. They were carefully constructed psychological triggers. Each image, each GIF, each bizarre internet artifact was a precision-engineered communication weapon designed to do something no traditional military strategy could achieve: completely disrupt the Krax's hyperlogical combat algorithms. Imagine a military AI system designed to predict and neutralize threats, suddenly confronted with images that defied all logical interpretation. A cat wearing a shark costume, riding a robotic vacuum cleaner. A human performing what was apparently called a TikTok dance while wearing tactical gear. Animated images that looped with surreal, mind-bending repetition. The Krax defensive network didn't just slow down. It started to glitch. Their predictive matrices are trying to categorize the content, one of the Zentauri analysts reported, sounding somewhere between horrified and fascinated. They're attempting to find strategic meaning in. Is that a dancing banana? Elena grinned. First rule of human warfare: sometimes the most dangerous weapon is complete and total unpredictability. The meme assault was just phase 1. As the Krax defensive systems became increasingly confused, Elena's team began the real infiltration. They didn't use stealth technology. They didn't use advanced camouflage. They used something far more dangerous. Absolute, weaponized absurdity. The infiltration team, dressed in a combination of tactical gear and what could only be described as the most ridiculous costumes possible. One team member wore a mascot costume. Another had rigged his combat armor to play 1980s power ballads. Their communication was a mix of military jargon and pop culture references that would make zero sense to any logical combat system. Wolverine Actual to Base 1 team member reported, "We are approaching the thermal exhaust port. Maverick is wearing the chicken suit. I repeat, Maverick is in the chicken suit." The Krax defensive systems, designed to detect and neutralize threats with mathematical precision, began to experience what could only be described as a computational nervous breakdown. Their threat assessment algorithms simply could not process what was happening. A military infiltration team, partially in tactical gear, partially in a chicken costume, communicating in a language that was 30% military protocol, 50% movie quotes, and 20% pure nonsense. Somewhere in the universe, Sun Tzu was either laughing or having an aneurysm. "We are approaching primary control node," Elena reported, her voice calm and professional despite the absolute chaos unfolding around her. "Expect complete system disruption in 3, 2, 1. The most terrifying sound in the universe wasn't a weapon. It wasn't an explosion. It was humans. Getting excited. And the Krax were about to learn exactly what that meant. The moment the Krax realized they were truly in trouble wasn't during a massive explosion. It wasn't when their defensive systems collapsed. It was when Major Elena Rodriguez started laughing. Not a combat laugh. Not a tactical acknowledgement. A full, genuine, absolutely unhinged laugh that sent shivers through every known sentient species monitoring the conflict. Lieutenant Zarake's communication tendrils went into what could only be described as a panic seizure. "Major Rodriguez, our tactical assessments suggest immediate strategic withdrawal." Elena was too busy enjoying herself to notice. The Krax had mobilized their entire reserve fleet, 17,000 combat vessels, quantum-encrypted shield technologies, weapons systems that could theoretically vaporize entire planetary systems with a single coordinated strike. They looked like a child's elaborate Lego construction about to be hit by a hurricane named human military strategy. Wolverine Team Elena said into her communication unit, "Prepare Operation Hold My Beer." The Zentauri observation team, watching via long-range quantum communication arrays, collectively developed what humans would call an existential crisis. Senior Analyst Krell's tentacles were performing a complex mathematical dance that translated roughly to "Oh dear God, what is happening?" The human infiltration team's response to a 17,000 ship armada was to play music, specifically a playlist that seemed to have been curated by a caffeine-addicted teenager with serious attention deficit issues. AC/DC's Thunderstruck blared across quantum communication channels. Then Queen's Don't Stop Me Now Then, inexplicably the theme song from Top Gun. They're using music as a communication protocol, one Zentauri analyst whispered, his translation matrix rendering pure existential terror. No, Elena corrected. We're using music as a tactical communication protocol. Each song wasn't just music, it was a coded instruction set. A method of synchronizing complex multi-stage attack sequences that would make absolutely zero sense to any logical combat algorithm. The Krax fleet, designed to predict and neutralize threats with mathematical precision, began to experience what could only be described as a technological nervous breakdown. Their quantum-encrypted defensive matrices started producing what their own systems could only classify as nonsensical threat responses. One Krax battle computer actually generated a surrender protocol that included instructions for performing the Macarena. Another defensive system started cross-referencing military tactical maneuvers with 1980s dance choreography. A third defensive network began composing what could only be described as a jazz fusion interpretation of potential combat scenarios. Their breaking senior analyst Krell reported, his voice a mixture of horror and fascination. Their entire strategic network is fragmenting. Elena's response was another burst of laughter. Honey, she said, switching to a channel she knew the Krax were monitoring, we're just getting started. The human infiltration team wasn't just attacking, they were performing. One team member codenamed Maverick was literally doing a choreographed dance routine while simultaneously dismantling a critical Krax defense node. Another was singing what appeared to be a Broadway show tune while deploying advanced electronic countermeasures. Their communication was a mixture of military jargon, pop culture references, and what could only be described as weaponized nonsense. Chicken suit is in position, one reported. I repeat, chicken suit is go. The Krax fleet started losing ships not through traditional combat, but through what their systems could only classify as computational confusion. Entire battle groups would suddenly change course because their navigation systems had been infected with what was essentially a military-grade meme virus. Defensive platforms would lower their shields because someone had uploaded a video of a cat playing a keyboard. Zarake turned to Elena, his communication tendrils doing something between a mathematical equation and a nervous breakdown. How are you doing this? Elena's response was simple. We're humans. This is Tuesday for us. The most terrifying moment came when the entire human team in the middle of a literally galaxy-changing conflict stopped to take a group selfie. With the Krax fleet burning in the background, set to Eye of the Tiger. Senior analyst Krell's final report would later describe the event not as a military engagement, but as a psychotic performance art piece with unfortunate military implications. The Krax would spend the next decade trying to understand what had just happened. Military academies across the galaxy would analyze the engagement for centuries. Humans would just call it a typical Tuesday. And somewhere, in the vast cosmic background, the universe itself seemed to be laughing. The Krax leadership had seen warfare. They had conquered civilizations, destroyed entire planetary systems. They had technological capabilities that made most species look like children playing with sticks and rocks. They had never, however, encountered anything like a fully motivated human military team experiencing what they would call peak excitement. Commander Kraknar of the Krax High Command stood on the central command deck of their most advanced warship, watching the tactical displays with growing horror. Their entire strategic network was collapsing not through traditional warfare, but through what could only be described as weaponized chaos. Report, he demanded. Yeah. His tactical officer, a being with 17 separate neural processing centers and computational abilities that could solve complex quantum equations in microseconds, looked up with what could only be described as technological shell shock. Sir, the officer responded, there. Singing, and dancing, and apparently solving complex military infiltration challenges while simultaneously producing what our linguistic matrices identify as dad jokes. The human team, led by Major Elena Rodriguez, had moved beyond conventional military engagement into something that defied all known tactical doctrines. They weren't just fighting a war. They were enjoying it. And that, more than any weapon, was terrifying. The sound of excitement wasn't a weapon. It wasn't an explosion. It was something far more primal, far more dangerous. It was the sound of humans realizing they were about to do something monumentally ridiculous and being absolutely thrilled about it. Lieutenant Zara Kay of the Zentauri Collaborative Force watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as the human team essentially turned galactic warfare into what looked suspiciously like an improvisational theater performance. They're not just defeating the enemy, he whispered to Senior Analyst Krell. They're humiliating the enemy. And the enemy doesn't even realize they're being humiliated. The final stage of the human assault wasn't a traditional military maneuver. It was a multi-layered psychological operation so complex that it would be studied in military academies for the next 5 centuries. Major Rodriguez activated what the Krax tactical systems would later classify as the absolute nonsense protocol. Step 1: broadcast an entire communication channel filled with nothing but 1980s power ballads and motivational speeches from sports movies. Step 2: simultaneously upload millions of internet memes directly into the Krax communication networks. Step 3: deploy a tactical team dressed partially in military gear, partially in mascot costumes, who would perform what could only be described as a military ballet mixed with interpretive dance. The Krax defensive systems didn't just break. They experienced what could only be described as a technological nervous breakdown. Entire battle groups started performing synchronized dance moves. Defensive platforms began generating what their own systems could only classify as nonsensical threat responses. One Krax battle computer actually generated a surrender protocol that included instructions for performing the Macarena. Another defensive system started cross-referencing military tactical maneuvers with 1980s dance choreography. "We are approaching final engagement," Elena reported, a voice calm and professional. "Expect complete system disruption in 3, 2, 1. And then, the sound. It started low. A chuckle. Then grew. A laugh. Then became something else entirely. The pure, unbridled sound of human military excitement. It wasn't a war cry. It wasn't a battle scream. It was something far more terrifying. It was the sound of people who were not just good at what they did, but were having the time of their lives doing it. Commander Krak Nar of the Krax High Command would later describe it in his official report as a sonic representation of weaponized joy. The Zentauri observation team would classify it as the most dangerous acoustic event in galactic history. Humans would just call it Tuesday. As the last Krax defensive systems collapsed, Major Elena Rodriguez turned to Lieutenant Zara Kay and winked. "Told you," she said. "We're just getting started." The universe, it seemed, would never be the same again. The official Galactic Collaborative Defense Force Incident Report classification, unprecedented, submitted by Senior Analyst Krell, Zentauri Diplomatic Corps. Addendum to Interspecies Military Engagement Protocol. Humans are not to be underestimated. Or understood. Possibly feared. Definitely respected. The aftermath of the Krax conflict would become the most studied military engagement in galactic history. Not for its strategic brilliance, though it was brilliantly strategic, but for its complete and total defiance of every known military doctrine. Military academies across 17 star systems would spend the next century trying to understand how a single human military team had dismantled the most advanced defensive network in known space using what appeared to be a combination of internet memes, 1980s power ballads, and what one Zentauri analyst described as weaponized nonsense. Major Elena Rodriguez was promoted, then immediately put in charge of developing what the Collaborative Defense Force called the unconventional engagement protocols. Her first official action was to submit a requisition order that included 3 vintage arcade machines, a complete collection of 1980s motivational posters, something called a rubber chicken with a pulley in the middle, 17 different flavors of energy drinks, a karaoke machine. The requisition was approved without a single question. Lieutenant Zara Kay, who had initially viewed humans with a mixture of confusion and mild diplomatic terror, now found himself as the primary human-alien liaison. His diplomatic training had never prepared him for meetings that could suddenly pivot from complex geopolitical negotiations to impromptu dance competitions. Humans are not a military force, Senior Analyst Krell wrote in his official report. They are a force of nature disguised as a species. The Krax, once the most feared military power in the known galaxy, were reduced to a cautionary tale. Their entire strategic network had been so comprehensively dismantled that they spent the next decade in what could only be described as a technological and psychological rehabilitation program. Their military leaders would gather in dark rooms, speaking in hushed whispers about the humans, not with anger, not with hatred, but with a mixture of respect and profound existential terror. One Krax military historian would famously write, "We did not lose a war. We were comprehensively, systematically, and hilariously defeated by a species that appeared to be treating galactic conflict like an improvisational comedy performance." The Zentauri Collective updated their official species classification for humans. It was no longer potentially mildly dangerous. It was now approached with extreme caution. Potentially apocalyptic, totally unpredictable, may break reality if provoked. Major Rodriguez, for her part, was already planning the next mission. "You know," she told Lieutenant Zara Kay during a routine debriefing, "we're just getting started." Zara Kay's communication tendrils did something between a mathematical equation and a nervous breakdown. The universe held its breath. And somewhere, in the vast cosmic background, something that might have been a laugh echoed across the stars. The humans, it seemed, were just getting warmed up.